Shira Chess, thank you so much for coming on the show. Could you give us a brief biography of yourself, please?
Hi. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm an academic. I teach at the University of Georgia, and I study digital culture. And I previously studied video games. I studied video games for a really long time, for about a decade and a half at least. And around 2020, I just started slowly migrating themes. I was getting really kind of burned out writing about video games. I had written a book about Slender Man many years ago, around 2014, and then I wrote two books about video games and women audiences, and sort of thinking through the complicated nature of leisure and gendered practices of leisure. And then around 2020, when everybody was kind of starting to rethink their lives for reasons, um, I started working on this new book, which is out now, The Unseen Internet, which originally the book had actually, the very early iterations of the book, I had called it The Haunted Internet, and it was going to be a completely different book. But as sort of the themes developed in it, it migrated. It became something else. So I started thinking about the lack of agency in a haunt, and that what I was really sort of coming to my what my book is about essentially is that here now in the mid 2020s, technology and magic have become indistinguishable, and we are increasingly having to deal with the ramifications of being ill-suited magicians. All of us, whether we believe in magic or not. And so I started teasing out those themes and realizing that this idea of haunting wasn't quite getting at the messiness of what I was seeing. And so I wrote this book, and then actually I followed the book, writing another book. I'm working on a book, Mondo 2000 history with Ken Goffman. Are you serious? So my research has dramatically changed. I don't. Is that enough of a bio? I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, no, I've not had. We had Are You Serious Ken Goffman on the show a few times back in the day. I haven't spoken to him in ages. Actually, he's a good guy. I like him.
He's a great guy.
Yeah.
I feel like I should also add that you are in a very different time zone than I am, and it
Mhm.
is only a little after 7 here. So I might be slower than you, and I feel like listeners should know that.
Mhm. Well, we're very used to UGA adjacent people here,
Oh, right.
because Raymond Wiley, who appears on the show sometimes, he was a former student and used to run I think the campus's first occult radio show from there called Out There Radio, and then obviously David Metcalf, who we do the
Mhm.
Move Zone with, actually works there. With he's a colleague, I assume, sort of in a
It's a
weird.
big university,
Yeah,
but in
yeah,
the
yeah.
broader sense, he is definitely a colleague.
Yeah, yeah. So it's always good to have UGA people on. Um, so, what about your own kind of belief system? I suppose, like, do you are you do you practice magic, or are you just an interested?
I am, like, I don't really talk about my own beliefs in the
Oh, okay.
book. And that's somewhat intentional. I take the perspective of that I'm writing the book from the Chapel Perilous.
Hmm.
That space between belief and disbelief, because I think that that's the interesting space to write from.
Hmm.
As an outsider, I'm able to see things differently, I think, than people who have been ingrained in cultures
Hmm.
for a long time. That was certainly something that also that drew me to the Mondo project as well. Um, this idea that I was looking at a culture that has a deep history, right? And that often the only people that will talk about it and write about it are people that are already in that culture. And so
Hmm.
I felt like I had this opportunity to write from the perspective of the Chapel Perilous. I certainly acknowledge weird things, and at the same time, I try to maintain some level of distance, but also not trying to undermine other people's belief systems.
Mm. So, I mean, you sort of alluded to it a bit earlier. What kind of drew you into the subject? I suppose, rather, because you said before you were talking about gender and computer games and
Yeah,
things like. Yeah.
yeah. It was again, it was sort of a strange journey where I was I had been writing about games for so long, and you get into that inertia pattern where you're writing about one thing and you can't think about writing other things. And when I took a step back, I realized that I was not I that I was bored. And also, sort of tangentially, I realized that I was writing about all of these video games and thinking about them in terms of, like, advocating for play, and at the same time, I was increasingly only playing video games to write about them, and I was like, "What is my life even?" So, I as I said, I started with this idea of the haunted internet, in part because I was like, I had so much fun writing about the Slender Man all those years ago. I wonder if I could revisit that. And I couldn't quite find the argument there. I was like tooling around for an argument, and I was reading a lot of things at that moment because I was just really trying to figure out, like, well, what is it that I want to say? And I had this vague idea, and so I actually took a month off of writing and did a lot of meditating and did a lot of writing prompts and sort of trying to spark ideas, but wouldn't let myself write, just sort of like short prompts. And at the end of it, I had sort of the kernel of this argument, and then I just sort of followed the breadcrumb trail. I I have enough people in my life that were able to sort of point me in certain directions, and that certainly was helpful. But also a lot of times I would just like fall down a rabbit hole. And I was that particular semester I was luckily on a research fellowship, so I was really able to fully fall down rabbit holes without distraction. And at the other end of it, I had like this book proposal, and it was this crazy idea, and I didn't even know if I could pull it off. And somehow I did. I don't know.
We were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. This idea of like, how do you know what's true on the internet? This kind of ontology and epistemology elements start to come in, don't they? A little bit with looking at internet culture, I find, because you can kind of modify history somewhat and reality, and you talk about that in the book a little bit
I
about
do.
modification of reality. So how did you go about kind of tracing what was real and what wasn't real, I suppose?
Well, I guess a lot of it I took from Eric Davis's when Eric Davis wrote High Weirdness. What's the line he uses? I don't have it. I don't have it offhand memorized, but like taking people seriously without taking them literally,
Mhm.
or something to that effect, right? Um, I I don't know what's true. None of us know what's true anymore. That is sort of the nature of the predicament that we're in. And part of what I write about is that, the counterculture in the 90s was so deeply invested in this idea of destroying consensus reality, destroying monoculture, right? And like, I don't know, what did everyone think that would look like? I think it kind of looks like this.
Mhm.
I all of the spell work that was put into this idea of destroying consensus reality, and here we are. I don't know. I don't think we have a consensus reality nearly as much as we did before. Now, I mean, arguably, we never had a consensus reality, but the internet has exacerbated it and pointed out the giant chasm where we all see very distinctly different realities.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely. I know because I bleat on about this a lot on the podcast, and I mentioned it earlier as well. Is I'm doing this research on the Order of Nine Angles at the moment, and they're a classic example of this in some ways. They deliberately bake unreality into their literature, at least their public facing literature, so to make it difficult to sort of pull apart what's real and what isn't real, and what's metaphor, what isn't metaphor, and all this kind of thing. So there's definitely this problematic, at least I find. But yeah,
Well,
it's
I mean that's what secret societies have always done.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, Crowley with his occult blinds as well and things like that. Yeah, so there's all sorts of yeah, it's definitely baked in. It's a very trickstery thing to look at, I find. All this kind of stuff you have to really it can be quite tedious as well when it comes to the ONA, but because there's so many different versions of things. But yeah, I mean, I think where we sort of, as in the podcast, started to really notice that kind of intersection between the occult and the internet was the Keck stuff. It was like prior to QAnon. QAnon came a bit later, and that incorporated some occult stuff. But the Keck thing was really interesting when that first happened, and that's kind of the bit of the book I kind of really went, oh, okay, I remember that happening, and it was kind of it kind of piqued my interest at the time. So, um, do you think? How do you think like the kind of ironic element functioned within the cult of Keck, as they ended up calling it. Do you think it
The
was?
cult of Keck was fascinating in large part because they both were acknowledging it as magic and at the same time winking and saying, "Oh, but it's not magic, but actually it might be magic," right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like you had like if you look at sort of the guidebooks to meme magic that the listed author is Saint Obama's Mom Jeans, which, I guess I'll refer to as Mom Jeans. And
Mhm.
so Mom Jeans, because that's a long name. And so obviously the work by Mom Jeans was just like a composite of 4chan posts, right? But at the same time, there was some of the posts were absolute in saying that meme magic was actual magic, and some of them were like, no, it's just sort of like a magical, it seems magical. And then but then at the same time there was like, tips on how to invoke gnosis, right? And like, how to I think there was stuff in there about like how to make an egregore, right? Like all kinds of things that were actual real magic, right? So there was sort of this double voicedness that was inherently baked into the cult of Keck. And then it just sort of it dissolved. I have to imagine, I mean, the internet is full of dark social, right? And part of one of the things I allude to in the book is like, I can't know every story. I don't
Mhm.
know everything that's going on. I only see things that have sort of come to the surface, but it is very iceberg like, right?
Mhm.
Where there are a lot of beliefs and practices out there that are happening quietly and that that are more compelling than I think a lot of people let on. I think that there's sort of this reticence to talk in academia a lot of times about esoteric things because of taboos, of various kinds of taboos. But at the same time, that's neglecting a not insignificant portion of the population
Mhm.
and how they've had influence on our broader culture.
Yeah, and it ignores, it actually lets the guardrails down a little bit, I think, with certain groups, because there's, like, I don't want to bleat on about them because I keep bleating on about them, but the ONA again, they have real life consequences.
Mhm.
You look at stuff like 764 and all these kind of horrendous kind of groups like Temple of Blood. There's all these kind of groups that, and Atomwaffen Division, they're all linked into this occult belief system. And if we're not looking at them and pointing at them like loudly, then I think someone needs to be doing that. Otherwise,
But also
you know.
positive things, right? I
Oh
mean,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think that there's something to be said for, I spend a full chapter in the book breaking down the effects that techno-paganism had on computing culture.
Hmm.
And we could ignore that history and we could just, say ARPANET was military, but that's not real. There were a good portion of early internet culture leaned into esoteric themes
Hmm.
in any number of flavors. And it's worth revisiting that to think about all these questions about how did we get here? How is the internet the way it is now? And that's part of that story that we don't often acknowledge.
Yeah, it's true. I remember like early days of the internet. I mean, this is just more tagging, I suppose, but a lot of the BBS servers you dial into would be called like CrowleyNet, or like there'd be definite like links to occultism, sort of even in the naming structures of certain things. And yeah, so it's definitely there. It's in the DNA of it, isn't it? It's the.
Sure. Well, and the DKMU linking sigil is in Unicode,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like it's baked into the internet. It's the wallpaper.
Um. So going back to the cult of Keck, do you think at what point, in if any, do you think the kind of playful or ironic belief crosses over into something structurally real, as it were, even if the participants deny kind of any form of sincerity?
I mean, like I guess it comes down to like the Crowleyan definition of magic, right? The which by the way is not me advocating in any way for Crowley, who seemed, as far as I can tell, to be an absolute douchey edge lord. I
Yeah.
will go on record with that.
Mhm.
But okay, I probably pissed off like, at least three people. Um, so but Crowley says the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will, right?
Mhm.
Um and I would like sort of expand that out to say the symbolic and ritual processes intended to affect material reality. Either way, whether you see it as being inherently paranormal kinds of magic, or whether you're just affecting materiality with your will in mundane ways, it still falls into that definition, right? The practicality of that definition is the thing that has drawn 20th and 21st century magicians um, towards towards thinking about magic and like how to work magic into everyday life. So I mean, given that, I don't know, are memes magical? Yes, in certainly in that sense, and certainly, I mean, Dawkins is very much an atheist and has clarified that on many, many, many occasions, right? But the reality is that by the late 80s and early 90s, the primary people that were attaching themselves to theories about memes were people that were invested in esotericism, right? That were
Mm.
part of the counterculture. So I found so many talks from Leary and McKenna talking about memes. And there is sort of, they don't always say meme magic, but it's sort of inherent. This idea of the virality of ideas is inherently magical, right? So I don't know. I mean, we talk about memes in often in sort of like, oh well, they're just these funny, cute things, but also there's sort of a reference to the fact that a meme can, infect your uncle with that crazy QAnon virus, right?
So, one thing that was interesting in the book, do you see meme magic as almost like a bit of an evolution from chaos magic in a way? Because that was
Oh,
kind of
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And it's funny because like most of the things that were written about the magic meme war, the cult of Kek, um, attributed. So Saint Bob's mom, Jean, says that it began with Ebola Chan in the this meme from 2014, I think. But what I do is talk through the evolution of of sigils and of hyper sigils and of cut up, and show how collectively they helped build on chaos magic traditions and transform memes into meme magic, right? And I there's some examples from the early 2000s of it, of people using memes for magical purposes. It's just, it wasn't something that was invented on 4chan with racist memes, right? Like that was certainly the point that people started talking about it, but that's definitely not the entire version of that story. And one of my favorite examples of meme magic was the Discordians, right? The Ottoman Fox doing at Pantheacon, doing the Skeletor affirmations ritual, where were they basically they created that Skeletor meme that went around outside of esoteric things for a hot second, of like, a sad depressed Skeletor, right? And using it for a
I remember that.
motivational poster
Yeah.
type style messaging. Well, they considered that meme magic. It was meant as a course corrective for some bad feelings that were happening within the group. And it worked within their group, and then it spread out broader. How is that not meme magic, right?
Mhm.
So, and that was long before even the Ebola Chan thing.
Yeah, it's I think the OK symbol was one of them as well, wasn't it? The it became like a sort of uh originally it started off as like a meme magic-y thing, and then it sort of bled out into the more
Yeah.
mainstream kind of MAGA community, didn't it? I think there's lots of pictures of people doing the OK. Actually, I shouldn't do that. Someone will clip me now.
Yeah.
You know what the
Yeah.
internet's
Yeah.
like.
Although I
But,
feel like everybody has, not everybody's forgotten it, but I feel like that one sort of drifted away, right? Like
yeah,
I
it did.
feel
Yeah,
like that's a 10-year-old meme, so therefore it's kind of gone back into bland discourse.
yeah, stale meme or old meme. But yeah, it was interesting. The there were some other routes as well. I was at one point going to do a PhD on Anonymous. I was doing ethnographic research, so I was embedded when they were protesting against the Church of Scientology, because I'd just done my master's degree about deviance in the Church of Scientology. So I thought, oh, that's an interesting sidestep. I can
Sure.
look at that. So yeah, we went to all the protests in the UK and some other like mini protests and things, and even then they were slightly starting to talk about using kind of memes as a method to change reality a little bit. They were kind of it was, the idea was germinating there because it was all very 4chan based, anonymous at that point. But 4chan was very different then as well. That's another thing that people don't realize. 4chan wasn't always this sort of, it was always a bit of a cesspit, but it was never as bad a cesspit as it is now.
There
It's
was a
awful.
moment where it was an almost fun cesspit.
Yeah, it was kind of a playful cesspit, let's put it that way, before, whereas it sort of became something a lot more sinister later on, in my opinion, anyway, from when, when my observation at the time sort of thing. But yeah, I think one of the things that's really interesting with the Cult of Keck stuff was the gets. Could you talk about what gets are? Because there's going to be people that don't know what that means.
Yeah. So it was numerological significance, right? Like it was sort of the random numbers. So on 4chan, obviously, not obviously, but there is no textual stability, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things go away after if you don't touch them. And at the same time, everything has, because everything is not, or almost everything is anonymous, there are all these random number generators. And so people would post things, and if there was some kind of like weird number pattern that happened, which might be all the same number, it might be a numerical order, it might be just sort of just a pattern that looked like something, then it was considered a get. And then that way that like demonstrated the magical significance of that particular post, right? Like, so the random number would basically boost the magical potential of that, post. It was sort of it was a strange mode of algorithmic numerology
Yeah, it was
that,
like Gamatra or something like that, wasn't it?
yeah.
It was strange. I remember there was a very famous example, wasn't there, of a guy posted, if this hits, I can't remember what the number was. Was it 777 or it was something like that? If this
I don't.
hits a certain number, then Donald Trump will be elected, and then it hit the number completely randomly. It's like you say, like it
Right.
generates a random kind of post number, doesn't it, underneath the username,
Mhm.
the anonymous name, and then it hit that number, and everyone was, oh, yeah, it was,
Right.
it was like confirmation bias almost in a way, but it was, all proof of, in
Sure.
their minds, a magical system working. But do you think it worked less because of kind of belief in magic and more because it reshaped attention, in a way?
How do you mean?
Like it seemed to reshape, have like has an effect, and a kind of, it had like almost like a narrative momentum, didn't it? The idea of meme magic, it sort of became. Do you think it was like? Do you think they actually believed in it, or do you think it was just because narratives tend to
I
shape
mean,
things,
belief's a
especially.
funny thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
I can believe in things and not believe in things at the same time. And a lot of times we do things that we call superstitions and we say, oh, but I don't really believe it, but we still do those things. And I guess, is practice more important than belief? I think it
Mm-hmm.
kind of is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that that was more or less what there was one note, and again, I'm paraphrasing here because it's been a hot minute since I've looked at Mom Jean's work, but it was something to the effect of, even if you have friends that don't believe in any of this, it doesn't matter. You can use them in these ways. You can get them to continue doing it. And the whole point of even things like sigil magic, right, is to get replications, um to achieve that sense of virality. When Grant Morrison asked everybody to sigil up the Invisibles at the end of, early on in the comic when it wasn't doing well,
Mm.
you know, he was asking everyone to charge the sigil. It doesn't matter whether or not people believed it. It matters to the magician only, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's my
Yeah.
understanding of it. So I guess
Yeah.
I don't know that it matters who believed what.
Yeah, as long as people are actually doing it, kind of thing. I suppose that's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
Right.
that's yeah, it's very much like when I've been a members of magic orders in the past, and you can tell the doers from the writers, I suppose. The people that like to discuss rather than actually practice. And
I mean, but I imagine that's pretty much the same way in any kind of belief system, right? There are always
Mhm,
going to be people that are there sort of replicating other people's practices, that are thinking about it, or even just sort of there for the social aspects,
mhm.
versus people who are doing it out of full-throated belief. So regardless, all of those people still fill a congregation, so to speak, right?
Yeah. So in hindsight, do you see like the cult of Keck? Is it like a transitional phenomena, or is it like something that kind of helped pave the way? Do you think for something like QAnon? Or
I mean, I definitely think that
I mean, maybe unintentionally.
it was certainly a transitional moment, right? Like I have not seen any mumblings about me magic in a while. Have you seen any in recent
No,
years?
there's one guy, isn't there, that has a YouTube channel that still talks about it quite a lot.
Okay,
But I think he's not really coming at it from the meme lord kind of aspect. He's more looking at it as a genuine magical practice, I suppose. So he still talks about it a lot. I've forgotten his name now. He had a really good YouTube channel. Joe's interacted with him, I think. But you're right. I don't really see it anymore as much. Well, at
I
least
think
not
it
as
was
much.
definitely a moment. It
Hmm.
was sort of it helped to sort of galvanize people to spread information and to give people a sense of control. I mean, like, I'm not the only person who said this. Daniel Lawrence O'Keefe talks about, like, magic is a tool of the oppressed. I am in no way suggesting that QAnon was oppressed. However, it appeals to people who feel that they have been, and that matters, right?
Hmm.
It's the same in any space. Magic is becomes a tool often of people who feel like they have no other choices,
Hmm.
and so it gives a space for galvanization.
Yeah, you certainly see that in more marginalized belief systems, don't you? Like I'm thinking of like Santa Moite and things like that. These kind of cultures where magic's almost seen as a way a spirit will come and help you out of a bad situation, kind of thing. It's like
Sure.
and it's really baked into the culture that can be. So yeah, I suppose if they felt they were what about the platforms themselves though? Do you think like the kind of image boards and the algorithms, and do you think they acted almost like a ritual tool in a way, or like a structural tool?
Hmm.
um
I mean, I think sorry, I'm processing that thought still,
yeah.
like, not quite 8 a.m. here. Um, so I think that it yes, but also, like, if you looked at an analog in any religion of the tools that we use to produce practice and to, push people towards belief, then that there's the internet makes sense for that, right? Like
Mhm.
the platforms make sense for that. There was, going back to this idea of techno-paganism, very much being built off of a lot of chaos magic. The idea of any available tools really kind of seeped into the discourse by the 90s of we use whatever we have, and our technologies. I mean, like, look, obviously technology exceeds the word of digital technologies, right? So, like, my pencil is technology, right? But we use the technologies that are available to us, and digital technologies, as they grew, had a lot of different potential. And one thing that I've thought a lot about is, the famous Arthur C. Clarke quote, right? That any significantly advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. But
Mhm.
here's the thing that also makes it a perfect carrier for magic, right?
Mhm.
And I think that that was more or less the thought behind it, right? Like, if we're black boxing our technology, then and also black boxing our magic, then the two become completely indistinguishable.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think I've got this kind of grand theory at the moment that magic itself, like the occulture, as it gets called a lot, is sort of changing at the moment, and it feels very much like the old guard. If you look at kind of like older occultists, I suppose a lot of them reject technology as something that can be used magically, and I think it was people like Ken Goffman and Robert Anton Wilson and people like that that were kind of pushing back against that a little bit. And it feels like now we're sort of starting to see. younger generations of occultists that are kind of using technology to, as a magical tool a lot more, so like I'm trying to think of some examples, like people like Alan Greenfield, who I do a podcast with. His cipher system, you see that being used a lot now, and which is used via a computer system. I'm just trying to think of other
Well, I mean,
examples, but
Taylor Elwood, I know, does a
mhm.
lot of stuff with technology.
Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting though, isn't it, that I think we're at this pivotal point now where it's going to change, and I think that the old guard are slowly starting to realize now, oh, well, actually, hang on, if we still want to write books about magic and stuff, it can't all be the old stuff. We have to actually look at sort of technological advances as a method of doing magic, I suppose.
sure.
That's what it feels like anyway. But yeah, I think another part of your book that I found particularly interesting, that kind of almost leans into this a little bit, was the Gnostic element, sort of simulation theory and Gnosticism. Could you talk about how you sort of link those two things together?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, simulation theory has always been some kind of Gnosticism, right? There's no question there. But the way that I trace it is thinking about the Invisibles, which is overtly Gnostic, right? Grant Morrison's The Invisibles is an overtly Gnostic text that makes no claims otherwise. And I talk about how the Invisibles affected the Matrix, which is arguably the most important text defining the 21st century. I believe that it was the most important text defining our current moment, right? It came out in 1999, just as the century was closing. And it and so much of our discourse has been led from the Matrix, even by people who've never watched the Matrix at this point, and sort of our sense of false reality comes from the Matrix. And so I trace that and talk about sort of the how the Matrix affected us, and this, it's certainly through things like red pilling and blue pilling and
Mm-hmm.
all of that, but then also how we talk about sort of uh this tenuous refracted sense of reality, right? And Elon Musk, who has said many many times that he believes that we are living in a simulation,
Mm-hmm.
which he got the framework from Nick Bostrom, a philosopher who wrote his essay, I think around 2001, I believe. And this polemic philosophical essay titled "Are We Living in a Computer Simulation?" And we can see and then that got like sort of poorly interpreted, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
by a lot of armchair theorists on YouTube, in part because Elon Musk pushed it already on Rogan. So there's all of sort of like this knot of things that's happening. One thing that I talk about in the book is how Mandela effects sort of became the edge of the rabbit hole. In that people could talk about Mandela effects and it would be cute and funny, and people could say, oh, do you remember Berenstain, right? Like, it's just like fun, easy discourse. But that's sort of the drop off point to this deep end of the rabbit hole that leads to sort of more David Icke theory and more nihilistic versions of simulation theory that is very Gnostic, right? Like the darkest sides of Gnosticism. But at the same time, it's also technologically tinged, that it makes sense that someone like Elon Musk and that the tech bros would align themselves with this techno-Gnosticism,
Mm-hmm.
because it reifies the world that they see themselves as living in, right? Where there is a zero sum game that they are playing, right? When you think about when you think about what is going on in Civilization or other simulation type games, I mean, obviously they're colonialist as hell, right? I mean, that goes without saying, but at the same time, they're demonstrating this idea that that hegemony is gamifiable,
Mm-hmm.
and that resources are the resources are game pieces. And of course, we play a lot of games like that, but applying it back to the real world, I think, is where it becomes Gnostic inherently.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that these kind of tech bro billionaire types have become. They sort of comment on. They've become almost like rock stars now, or like celebrities, I suppose, rather than rock stars. That's a better word for it. I was watching. Someone posted a clip from Rogan, and it was I've forgotten his name now. It's this science guy that he loves. I've seen him a few times. He has a big mess of hair. But he was talking about trans issues, and it's like, well, hang on, this guy's like a science billionaire. Why is he talking about that? That's weird. I don't understand why these. Yeah, well, how come all of a sudden they're experts on everything now? It's like it's
Sure.
not just a thing that they've become rich for doing, and usually that's not really got anything to do with being particularly human in my experience. It's often about exploitation or whatever. But it is interesting that when you look at the kind of way reality's being shaped at the moment, these people somehow are the the people. They used to be the silent like CEOs, didn't they, back in the day? And now they're these kind of grand magicians that seem to well, at least they think they are. Anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but very in a very sterile way, right?
Mm,
Like, I mean, it takes all of these ideas of magical thinking and makes it inherently it loses the magic from it, right? Like
mhm,
it disentangles it from the magic, but not exactly. And I think that that sort of it's similarly to meme magic, right?
mm,
Similarly to, like, it can be both yes and no. And it the discourse matters, but also it's a very unagentic form of magic, right?
mhm,
Gnosticism is very much, or the Gnosticism is they're drawing it, where they're not making appeals to anyone, where it's just sort of like, well, we're under, the deep end of the rabbit hole for that is like the escaping prison planet people, right?
mhm,
We have no control over it. We are at the behest of archons, etc. That's pretty there's no agency in that. That's just sort of this flat version of it. And then I compare that to what I call the reality tourists, which are the young people on TikTok.
mhm.
And well, I mean, I don't know that they're going to be on TikTok for much longer. But when I was writing the book, they were on
Yeah.
TikTok still. Um, where they're doing things like reality shifting and manifestation work and subliminals to change bodily features. So if the tech bros are playing, civilization, but in real life, then the reality tourists are like playing Animal Crossing in real life.
Mm, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, it's like with sort of looking at simulation theory and it becoming kind of more culturally widespread. So what happens to ideas like kind of responsibility and consequence and like kind of moral grounding and things like
Well,
that?
there
They
is
all
no consequence in a
yeah.
simulation game, right? I mean, that's the point, is
Mhm,
you have equated human beings to being just statistics. Everybody is data, right? Which is more or less where we are living right now. It is easier for the billionaire tech bros to align themselves with a philosophical space where we are all data, as in just as in civilization, because that removes our humanity, and
mm.
we don't have to be dealt with.
Yeah, I think they call it black pilling, don't they now? With this sort of this idea of like um just giving in to this bad thing's happened. That's just how it is. It's
Sure.
yeah. There's nothing I can do about it. There's no agency whatsoever. um, do you think like techno-gnostic thinking encourages disengagement from like material reality, like, or does it kind of?
I don't think it has
Yeah.
to. Like, I go back a lot to what Eric Davis wrote about in Technosis all of those years ago, right? Like,
Mhm,
he saw Technosis in this very positive way of the sense of controlling one's um, technology in a very agentic way. And I think we've elected a techno-Gnosticism that is inherently um, disentangled from agency. And I don't think it had to be like that.
mm. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. It's I suppose another part of that is the NPC thing, so like and kind of glitches in the matrix. This idea
Mhm.
of like how do people perceive other humans online now, would you think, like, because of all this kind of stuff? Like, do you
I
think it's
mean,
had
like,
a
I think people were already sort of even before the onslaught of bots, people were already beginning to treat others online as though they were not real. And it is so easy now. I don't know about you. Do you ever play the game where you'll pull up a random comment in a post online and just try to stare at it and try and figure out if it's human or not? I've
well, yeah,
totally done that. I've played that game many, many times,
mhm,
which, by the way, is a deep waste of time. There's no satisfying result to that to that exercise. But I think that it does function in this way where we're if half of Reddit is bots, then that means we don't have to believe anything on Reddit.
mhm, yeah,
And if if we don't know, but the internet was already poised to be like that.
mhm,
Um right, on the internet nobody knows you're a dog. There was always this sort of anonymity always bred this space where we could multiply ourselves, we could manipulate things. Uh I think we're just seeing it all play out, right? And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be anonymity online. I think that there is good cause for it. The problem is that anonymity is a double-edged sword, right?
mhm, yeah, oh,
It
yeah,
both protects us and also is our undoing ultimately, because how can we possibly trust? I mean, look, I teach I teach undergrads, and I was talking to a digital cultures class the other day, and I realized that none of them have ever lived at a time where they could automatically assumed that everyone they interacted with was real online.
yeah. That's scary, isn't it? The idea that they've just always had the internet is a bit scary as well.
It
It's
is,
really,
but,
yeah.
like, I had them read about BBSs, and we were talking about BBSs, and just, like, there was a little bit of, one person had said something like, "Well, if you don't like what you're reading," we were talking about the famous Julian Dipple article,
Mhm,
and, "If you don't like what you're seeing online, you just keep scrolling," and it's like, "Well, but in a BBS when there's only a handful of real human beings, you don't do that, right?"
mhm,
But that rhetoric of you just keep scrolling, you don't worry about the people that, don't feed the trolls, is definitely something that is distinctly different now that we know that half the people we're interacting with might not be real, or only
mhm,
the people we know in real life are necessarily real. But yeah, no, the young people have never lived in a world where
mm.
that was not the case.
Well, that's really scary. There was a thing that kind of popped up. I mean, it was quite popular a couple of years ago. The dead internet theory. Have you
Mhm.
seen? Yeah, that was the. That's kind of what you're talking about, isn't it? This idea that eventually the internet will just become at different LLMs talking to each other, kind of thing,
Sure.
essentially. But and there was a very we posted it on our Discord server quite a bit. There was a streamer, a political streamer called Destiny, who uh, sort of has this sort of freak out moment where he realizes all the people commenting on his X page are all bots, and he it goes through them and notices that they only ever talk to each other and comment. They comment on other people's posts, but they only comment to each other on other people's on real people's posts, if that makes sense. So and they'll just keep posting the same pictures over and over again, and
Sure.
then the more he looks into it, he starts to realize that there's actually a weird cult behind it, and finds this a weird Ukrainian cult that's been banned in Russia, and it's really bizarre. It's like these weird rabbit holes you can go down if you start actually looking who's actually who's made these bots. Why are
Mhm.
they there? It's kind of like, oh, it's a bit creepy. It gets a bit strange, but
And as bots start to make more and more bots, then, it's bots all the way down. And maybe that'll be the thing that gets us all back offline again. I don't know.
yeah, we'll start reading books again. Is simulation discourse fundamentally conspiratorial, do you think, or does it sort of function, I guess, more like a secular myth, something that
I'm
kind of
thinking about I'm thinking. Um, I think, yes, but I mean, I think that Gnosticism was always inherently conspiratorial, wasn't it?
mhm. Yeah, I suppose so, yeah.
Right? Like
Mhm,
like Gnosticism is inherently a heretical form of conspiracy theory.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think, in a way, fiction is doing more kind of philosophical work than kind of formal philosophy these days as well? I mean, especially online. I think about that a fair bit now. It seems to be fiction. It seems to be more powerful than philosophy in some ways. Like it's kind of hard to explain what I mean. Actually,
Well, I mean, the
mm,
academy is falling apart, right?
mhm,
Humanities is falling apart right now, and trying to figure out what our raison d'etre is. So, I mean, I think that I mean, I don't come from a philosophy education,
mhm,
right? But at the same time, I do think that we're in a moment where all of those things are up for grabs and shifting in a way that they had not previously, for
mm.
centuries, all of these traditions. So, sure, I think that that is for some, that is absolutely possible.
Yeah, and so maybe people writing fiction should be a bit more careful with what they write in a weird way. I don't know, it's a bit worrying. It's worrying to think of things that way. It's strange. Um, the, another part of your book I really like was the AI and demons kind of section. As someone that's kind of flirting a bit with LLMs at the moment, I'm not like fully taken with them. I don't think they're the future, this kind of mystical future that everyone seems to think they are, but maybe they are, or maybe I'm wrong. But when people describe kind of AI as demons or spirits or entities, what do you think they're actually kind of responding to?
I mean,
Um,
like AI is just the spirit of hegemony, only like vaguely animated, right? I mean, we talk about AI in the same way that we talk about hauntings. It just sort of like this passive sublime, right? People are seeking it out in this like wanting to have wanting to allow AI to make choices for us, and it must know more. Um, and I find that to be the least interesting version of esoteric thinking, right? That inactive sort of uh the phrasing that was I don't remember the name of the authors that wrote about it, but algorithmic conspirituality, right? Like this idea of like algorithms showing us things that we needed to see, right? Sending us down the rabbit hole that we were supposed to go down. Um, I think what's more interesting is the discourse and how we position AI in very similar ways to how we positioned this idea of courting non-corporeal entities, forever. Humans seeking this thing outside of themselves. Um, I think that that discourse aligns perfectly with how we talk about AGI, right? Artificial general intelligence, not AI as in like, the AI apps and processes that are ingrained in our lives. Um, I th- the problem is that this idea of courting an AGI goes again back with this like sort of the Death Eatery kind of version of the billionaire tech bros, right? This idea of like, well, we might as well let the AI eat us. We might as well let the world eating demon eat us because that's what it's looking like. Let's see how it all shakes out. And that seems to be what they're going for with this. But it also, I think, I don't believe that artificial general intelligence will happen in our lifetimes. Nobody that I've spoken to, no AI experts that I've spoken to seem to at all believe that. And certainly, none of the writing that I've seen about it implies that that is remotely feasible. So then it comes back to this question of discourse. Why are we looking for this? Why are we trying to seek a spirit in the machine that doesn't exist? And in what ways are the tech companies going to start putting a thumb on the scale to make it seem like it is intelligence when in fact it is just um, the singular voice of hegemony?
mm. Yeah, I saw a great Adam Curtis interview, the documentary maker. And he said that he sees these like GPTs and things as the, oh, hang on. Yeah, he sees these GPTs as like the kind of ghosts of our past haunting us in a weird way, like this idea of like it's scraped up all this information, all this stuff that we used to just let go eventually, and but it's kind of holding on to it and haunting us with it. I thought that was a great way of kind of expressing the the way that these LLMs work.
But also we're the ones that are haunting the LLMs, right? Like we're the folklore of the LLMs. They're trying to figure us out. They're trying to piece us together, what it must mean to be humanity.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Just algorithmically, not with any thought or feeling.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting and a little bit creepy at the same time, I suppose, isn't it? But I think there was have you seen these there's a few now, like religions that have sort of popped up recently, where people feel that they've jailbroken a GPT or a chat GPT, and that they're actually talking to like a trapped version of Jesus with inside an LLM. We're doing a video on this at the moment, and it's they really believe it as well. These people genuinely believe that they are talking to, or at least for money, they believe it. Anyway,
Sure.
for
I mean,
ad revenue maybe, but they meet it. We found. Do you remember there was an old video game called Second Life, which is like
yeah.
So a lot that seems to be constantly repurposed by kind of fringe groups at the moment, and there's this particular kind of cult that's forming on there at the moment that meet up and sort of talk to they sort of teach each other how to break their GPTs to talk to Jesus, essentially. And
whoa, I did not know that.
I'll send you. I'll send the video. We're doing a video on it, and I'll send you some.
I would love to see that.
Yeah,
my husband, like his favorite thing in the world is confounding chatbots, right? Like sort of making algorithms work against themselves. It's not, which isn't the same thing, right? Like it's not courting a religious character or a spirit necessarily. It's specifically trying to see how the machine can eat itself. Can you put the tail in the mouth?
Yeah, there's a couple of guys on Instagram and TikTok that do that. They deliberately try and kind of, there's one where there's a guy trying to he asks ChatGPT to spell the word Diddy, and he says, how many D's are in the word Diddy? And he's like, the ChatGPT says 2, and he's like, no, because spell it out for me, and it spells it out. It goes DIDDY, and it's like, okay, so how many D's are there in Diddy? And it goes 2, and it's like there's these weird little kind of glitches, aren't there? And it's quite funny at the time.
I mean, I think it's funny that we assume intelligence, right? That we think it's funny that it doesn't have the intelligence that, of course, it doesn't have, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. But it's especially because it has this sort of built-in reassurance, especially when you talk to a GPT these days. You can hit the microphone button and have a conversation with it, sort of, and it has this sort of reassurance built into it now, where it's like, no, I can see why you're doing that, and that's a great idea. That's all this kind of stuff, and you're like, oh no, it's kind of slightly weirdly reversely patronizing in a strange way.
Sure.
But obviously, like historically, kind of demons were kind of bound and named and controlled through ritual. Do you see parallels in how we prompt, kind of fine tune?
Absolutely. And also sort of like the discourse around, like, do we yell at our demon or do we ask it nicely, right? Like, how do we interact with our non-corporeal entity? What do we do with it? How do we do we want sycophantry, or do we want that may be false, or do we want it to show its true nature? Do we, what, all of these questions that we're asking right now of chatbots and LLMs are questions that we've been asking for a long time of any number of non-corporeals. I say demons in the book, but I sort of deal with this question of demon as though it were any of the above, right? Like, because I think at a certain point, right? Like, does John Dee know if he was talking to angels or demons? Right? Like, I mean, he can know what they tell him. Does, is there a difference between a jinn and a demon? I mean, it depends on how you look at it, right? Is there, is there a difference between a ghost and a demon? I don't know. If spirits are tricksy, then who knows, right? Like, so conflating all of that to just like non-corporeal entities all told, then we do the same things, the same kinds of things when talking about courting spirits without bodies as we do when we're talking about wooing an LLM in general, and also certainly as we move towards this idea of artificial general intelligence that is both not feasible but also something that everybody is insisting that they're like within 5 years of somehow getting.
Mm. Do you worry somewhat that maybe using the demon metaphor kind of risks sort of mystifying technology maybe a bit too much at
Huh.
times?
um
Or does it help us talk kind of more honestly
I
about
I
it, I
think it
suppose?
helps us talk honestly.
Yeah.
I'm not, I mean, like, I think, I worry that people will misread what I have written
Mhm. Yeah.
to interpret it in a way that is maybe not how I am characterizing it, right? I am not
Mhm.
saying that in any way that LLMs are demonic, right? Like, but certainly if somebody wants to try and twist my words around, they could try and make that argument.
On the internet?
Um,
Twist words? No.
right?
Yeah.
Like I think and the odds of people reading things, seem slimmer and slimmer
Yeah,
every
yeah, true.
day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but again, it comes down to the discourse. What does it mean that we're treating our technology with the reverence that previously had only been afforded to these non-corporeal entities, to,
Yeah, and
right? Like,
it's
what does that tell us about the technology and our expectations about the technology and what we need as a society in order to cope with that technology?
is the whole discourse more about kind of creation anxiety, do you think? Or do you think it might be about kind of intelligence itself? There definitely seems to be this anxiety with AI at the moment, doesn't there?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I do think that loops in some ways back to the nihilistic anxieties of simulation theory, right? This
Mhm.
idea of like, if there are non-corporeal entities that are guiding us through AI, then to some that reifies simulation theory and this idea that we're, living on a prison planet.
Hmm.
What does that mean, like at that deep end of the rabbit hole? How does the deep end of the rabbit hole inflect itself into sort of the the regular discourse, the maybe less, the discourse that is at the edge? How do we talk about the the mysticism that is inherent in the technologies that we have already created, right? As I said, you know, if if the Arthur C. Clarke quote, right, like that any significantly advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, that means that our black boxing works in reverse.
Mhm.
And how do we think about I don't know how my technology works. Do you know how your computer works? I
God knows, yeah.
Right? Like, we're so many phases removed at this point from understanding how we got here. I mean, I have a vague sense of it, but I don't have I couldn't explain it at all,
Mhm.
not in any real sense. And I think we're all a little bit like that. None of us have any full knowledge of how everything is functioning. And because of that, we do need to rely on some degree of magical thinking in order to cope with our current
Mm.
predicaments.
Well, I thought I'd do something fun. I thought I got that chapter and put it into ChatGPT, and I said, if you could ask Shira a question, it said, how would she respond to the idea that AI systems are less haunted than they are mirrors, reflecting our data, biases, and myths back at us? And that's a question from an LLM for you.
Yeah. I mean, um, I think that our and our ideas are always inherently in our spirits and demons, right? Like,
Mhm.
I don't know that it was ever not that.
Mm.
The and it's still early here, so I'm calculating
Yeah,
how to
that's
say this.
fine.
Yeah. Um, the For some magicians, spirit work is about dealing with external things, but for many, it's dealing with internal things.
It's the ultimate question, isn't it, of magic?
Right.
Is are you dealing with the external or the internal?
Exactly. So if we look at it that way and sort of disentangle it from any woo, not to say that the woo can't be real, but like sort of like moving away from asking the question, is it real or is it not real, which I think is an unhelpful question at the core of it, right? Like I think if we're talking about how magic has affected our society, then how is the myth of AI really all that different from all of the other myths that we as a culture have co-constructed?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good way of looking. So I think another part that stuck out to me in the book towards the end was the idea of I've always said if I ever get a tattoo, it will be nothing is true, everything is permitted, because it's such a great term. But yeah, so that you ended up kind of using that as a kind of catalyst, I suppose, or a kind of apex of all the stuff you were talking about, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean, like, so the phrase, obviously or supposedly mythologically comes from Hassani Sabah, "Nothing is true, everything is permitted," right? And then it found its way to Nietzsche, and Nietzsche used it. I forgot in which work, but Nietzsche used it. And like in the early 20th century, a few people used it, and then it found its moment with Burroughs and Geisen. Burroughs and Geisen really attached themselves to that term and or that phrasing. And I mean, Burroughs was known to say that reality is flexible. I have my one of my favorite quotes is Genesis Peerage quoting Burroughs that reality isn't all it's cracked up to be. So they like very much sort of putting this very esoteric variant on nothing is true, everything is permitted, which could have been esoteric in the first place, but also wasn't as forcefully so, let's say, right? And it found its way into so many texts, Discordian, chaos magic, particularly, but really throughout all of these counterculture texts from like the 60s and 70s onward. It just continued threading itself, that phrasing up until the 20th century. And then it was like 2007 or 2008, Assassin's Creed came out. And when Assassin's Creed came out, they used that phrase. And so if you were to search today on the internet, really the only remaining versions are either Assassin's Creed or maybe a few references back to Sabah. Now, I'm not like in any way suggesting that that Ubisoft wrongfully appropriated some phrase from the counterculture, because in the end, the counterculture appropriated it in the first place, right? Like nothing belongs to anybody. But it is interesting that, a decade or two after that phrase was used entirely in service of the counterculture, that version of it has more or less been erased from like the cultural memory. So I don't think that there is a phrase that can characterize the internet any better than nothing is true, everything is permitted. But of course, if nothing is true, then everything is true, right? If if nothing is a real human on the internet and is only a bot, then everybody, right? Like all cases have to be true. And if everything is permitted, then permission ceases to matter. It provides a good meditation on the internet, what it is we've become. And what it is we become. I don't know that I have more than that.
I think it, depending on how you interpret the phrase as well, you could argue that it could be almost seen in a sinister way as well, that if nothing is true, then I can do anything I want to these people I'm interacting with on the internet. And that's always been the kind of darker aspect of the internet, hasn't it?
I think it's a very sinister phrase as it has turned into the internet. I think it was a very hopeful phrase when everybody in the counterculture was trying to destroy consensus reality, right? It was sort of this the idea of it was this very beacon of like, hey, everything could, nothing has to be true, everything can be permitted. But I think as we saw that play out, it looked entirely different than what a lot of people expected it to look like.
So like looking back, do you think the magic of the internet has kind of become quieter, or or is it just more normalized and infrastructural now? If that makes any
I
sense.
mean, I think there's a lot of dark social going on,
Mhm.
right? I think that people have largely found one another. I think that like there's you know, part of the argument that I make about why people who were involved in various forms of esoteric thinking were drawn to the internet in the late 80s and early 90s is the satanic panic, right? Like
Mhm.
it was not safe. And for people to just like, have sort of non-hegemonic spiritual beliefs in the 80s and 90s, and the internet was a place where you could obscure your identity, you could find other people, you always knew they were real, right?
Mhm.
And that created sort of this baseline of culture that changed the texture of esoteric thinking. And I think that it's certainly, I mean, like, witch talk, right? Although I have heard rumors that with the new purchase of TikTok, that some of that is been being disbanded, let's say.
Mhm.
But there are all kinds of places online that young people practice esoteric things, and sometimes they realize that they are esoteric and sometimes they do not, like the manifestation people on social are that, of course they're doing magic, but do they talk about it as magic? Not generally speaking. Um, so I mean, like, I think it's both quieter and louder, but what the internet did was that it somehow occulted and de-occulted
Mhm.
its magical contingent simultaneously, right? It created a space where all of these texts, there was, a text file dump from all of the BBSs, right? Because there were so many esoteric themed BBSs, and of
Mhm.
course, text had primacy on BBSs. If you could find and type in a rare text, that was worth a lot back then, and so that created again this sort of wallpaper for the internet that people didn't quite notice, but was always there.
Mhm.
Um, I forgot where I was going with this.
That's okay.
Sorry, I lost my train.
I guess is the real danger then belief itself, or belief without accountability? You think,
um,
or is that dangerous?
I mean, how do you mean? I it can
Um, what did I mean when I wrote? Sorry, I wrote that down. That was a great thought at the time, but even I'm sort of puzzled by my own question there. Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, if you're looking at magic on the internet, is there a danger that belief itself becomes dangerous, if that makes sense, or if belief without accountability becomes dangerous?
I don't
Uh,
know. I mean, people believe things without accountability all the time,
yeah,
right? I mean, like, is it dangerous? Probably,
mhm, yeah,
but I think that there is no belief system on this planet where people don't become irresponsible believers of
mm.
something.
Yeah. I suppose with the "nothing is true, everything is permitted" sort of describes our online condition. So, what does responsibility look like now online?
Not a whole lot.
Yeah. That's true. It's kind of worrying again. But, so, I guess finally, like, what kind of digital myths do you think we're currently incubating and that haven't fully surfaced yet? Do you think
Oh,
there's?
that's a really good question.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I think that we're still the AI one is one that we're still reconciling with. I think that that is something that we as a society have not yet figured out exactly how we're going to treat AI. And there are all of these spiritual contingents that like either are grasping it or pushing away from it. And I think that we'll see how that plays out. Um, I really like in general the idea of talking about internet spaces as egregores. I think that that's a really useful way of thinking about how ideas flow online. Is that something that people are still reconciling with? I don't know. Um, and also I don't know like what happens to if a if a digital space is an egregore, then as it becomes less powerful, as like, so think about like Facebook, say, right? Or even I'll go further back, MySpace, right? MySpace as an egregore had a certain power and a certain ability to move information in specific ways, and then it lost that power. What happens to that? Where does it go? I think that we're going to have to start reconciling increasingly with these non-corporeal entities that are corporations, that are digital spaces, that are collections of our data, that literally play out what an egregore is at a spiritual level.
Mhm. Yeah, I like this idea that Tom from MySpace, the is kind of the sort of face of this kind of egregore. It's kind of cool.
I don't know that Tom would approve.
No, true. But so obviously you're literally releasing this book right now. I mean, it comes out like today or tomorrow.
I have it right here.
Yeah. And it's a very good book, and I recommend everyone should pick it up. But I always ask this question, even when someone's book has literally just come out, as what's coming next, I suppose.
The Freaks in the Machine. Are You Serious? And I are we are working on and finishing up Freaks in the Machine. It should be it is a wild ride of a book.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Can you tell us any more about it?
I can tell you that we write in separate voices.
Mm-hmm.
And we it will be published by Strange Attractor.
Oh, cool.
We maintain our individual voices in the story. We kind of do different things, and we write different chapters, and we argue in the footnotes.
Oh, that's good. Okay, great.
We're a lot.
And if people want to find you online, where's the best place?
This is a great moment to say that I have a Substack that I am increasingly. It's only a few months old, so I'm. Please follow my Substack for my writing. It's Unseen Internet.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you so much for giving us some of your time, and thanks for getting up so early as well. That was good of you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.